introducing Alexander Darwin, moderated by Fonda Lee. Give them a little round of applause. Have a little bit of housekeeping very quickly. If you haven't picked up your pre-ordered book, or if you would like to buy one, you can do that at the register in the back of the event space at the end of the event. Thank you so much for your support and for buying books with us. Also, we are live streaming tonight, so if you don't wish to appear on camera, please avoid the iPad right there. Hello, Internet. Thank you. Fonda Lee is the author of the epic fantasy Green Bone Saga, consisting of the novels Jade City, Jade War, and Jade Legacy, along with the prequel novella The Jade Setter of Jan Loon, and a short story collection, Jade Shards. She's also the author of the science fiction novels Zero Boxer, Exo, and Crossfire. Her most recent work is the fantasy novella Untethered Sky. And keep an eye out for next week. She has a new book, which title is escaping me at the moment.
Oh, Breath of the Dragon.
Yes, look out for Breath of the Dragon.
It's good, I've read it.
Alexander Darwin is an author living in Boston with his wife and 3 daughters. Outside of writing fiction, he's written for publications such as Rolling Stone magazine, and he teaches and trains martial arts. The final book in an action-packed science fiction trilogy set on a far future world where the fate of nations is determined by single combat. That rare book that fully satisfies me as an action fan, says someone named Fonda Lee of the book. The Greevar War has engulfed the empire of Kira, and Silas the Slayer has given voice to his warrior kin, igniting a revolution within a people once bound by 1,000 years of servitude. Seago is released to a war-torn world where the lines between shadow and light are blurred. He must decide which path to follow, one of his brother's righteous rebellion, or the one that leads to the family he's finally found. Once famed knight Murray Pearson leads a group of Lyceum students on an adventure across Kira to follow the path of combat mastery, but Murray seeks something more on this long road, redemption. In this explosive conclusion to the Combat Code saga, the truth will be revealed, and one final question must be answered as they step back into the circle. What is the cost of losing the fight? And now, without any further ado, I will hand the stage over to Alexander Darwin and Fonda Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks, well, thanks for coming, everyone, joining us for the launch of Blacklight Born. So, quick show of hands, who here has read either the first or the first 2 books in the trilogy? Okay, and who is new to the series? All right, awesome.
Right.
New readers.
There we go.
So, perfect way to start off. Alex, first of all, congratulations on completing the trilogy.
Thank you.
So for the benefit of the members in the audience who are new to your series, how do you usually like to pitch the combat codes?
Yeah, so I have like a pretty short pitch and then a very short pitch. So the pretty short pitch is, what if there was a world where wars have been replaced by single combat duels, much like you might encounter with mixed martial arts, where everything was on the line. So resources, people themselves are all on the line at the hands of these fighters called Greevar. And so the entire political system, the entire world building is based on this premise. And the really short pitch would be, what if Hogwarts taught martial arts?
Good, I'm glad I've been pitching it right, because I've been calling it, what if the fate of nations was decided by UFC?
Yes, no, I think it was the publisher sold it as Red Rising meets UFC. So
Nice. Yeah.
who knows how accurate that may be.
So the other thing you mentioned was Hogwarts, and if it taught martial arts.
Yes.
So one thing that struck me about the series right from the start was it's this action, science, fantasy, and it's got these Greevar and these kick-ass fights, but it also is a coming of age story. And the Seago, the main character, and his friends, they're learning all these different martial arts skills in the Lyceum, and it's as if, like, instead of English 101, you would like arm bars 101, like takedowns 200. How much of this series was just wish fulfillment on your part?
All of it. I mean, it is very true that as a lifelong martial artist and someone who grew up, watching kung fu movies and loving The Matrix and all these things, and also being a huge fan nerd, I was really what my wish would be, to be able to go to school, and I was always daydreaming of, like, you know, instead of being in math class, which I didn't really enjoy that much, if I could be, you know, learning martial arts or something, the equivalent of that, so.
Yeah, so a lot. I mean, we're mostly just writing books for ourselves, right?
Yes,
Books that we
yes.
want to read that aren't on the shelves yet, and so we have no choice but to actually
Yeah.
write them. But Combat Codes, I mean, obviously, has started out as fairly contained. It really was like the story of Seago, and then to a secondary extent Murray, and then it expanded quite a lot in the second book. You introduce new point of view characters. Solara becomes a big part of the story. Silas makes a huge impact when he arrives. So as you went into writing the third book in this trilogy, did you still see it primarily as Seago's story, or how much did the scope kind of expand and the world expand in the process of bringing the story to a finale?
Yeah, that's always a tough balance, and I don't want to give away spoilers, because then I know we have a lot of new readers, but I think I shouldn't be talking too many criticisms right now, go get the book, but one criticism was, like, Seago is really, again, the primary point of view alongside Murray in the first book, and given the cast of characters expands gradually throughout the trilogy, and also the stakes expand from, like I didn't want this to be, again, as much as I love Hogwarts meets, you know, UFC, I didn't want, given it's a trilogy, it was always planned to be a trilogy, I didn't want it to just be every book is a new story within the school setting, which I love, again, but that's not what I wanted the series to be. I wanted there to be a coherent arc across the entire series, and I wanted the stakes to come outside of the school setting and build into the greater world, and so the cast of characters expands quite a bit, and that was tough, because I had to take time away from our main characters, and a lot of readers don't necessarily like that. They want to stay in the school setting every book. They want there to be like 10 books all in the school setting, which if the publisher wants that, I'll write it, but at the same time, that's not what I had originally plotted out, and it was a balance between giving time to the screen time to these new characters, adding new characters, but I feel like it had to be done, because just staying with Seago limits the scope. You only can explore the world so much through one character's eyes, because they have a very specific point of view, and in order to see the world as it, you know, in all its texture, I feel like you have to have a lot of point of views. Actually, Fonda's series, you know, the Greenbone Saga, really was inspirational, because she does such an incredible job with multiple point of views, being able to flesh out the texture of the world. Jan Moon.
Thank you, Alex. So I'm going to ask you the question that gets asked of me a lot when it comes to multiple POV stories. Do you have a favorite character?
Yeah, I do. Murray is my favorite character.
Murray's my favorite character too.
I mean, as someone who's now in their 40s, you know, and a martial artist that's been doing it for a long time, and I know there are some of my training partners here, and we all know you take a toll on your body, and Murray really epitomizes kind of like that character who's been it. He's down on his luck. His body is kind of destroyed, and his mind is also kind of in the dumps, and I liked writing that from that point of view, because it gave him a lot of room to breathe and to give him a purpose. And when he found that purpose, which is Seago, it really allowed me to write that character to his fullest. So I enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, I kind of think of Murray as like a more cynical, beat up version of like All Might from My Hero Academia.
I've never seen
Okay.
it. I've heard it's good. I've heard it's good.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a character in this series that really reminds me of All Might, if that works for any of you. So one thing that we share, obviously, is a love of writing combat scenes. And I've talked at length on panels about what makes an effective combat scene and how to go about writing one. But it's something I also always love talking about with other authors for whom that's a passion. So when you're going into writing these action scenes, these combat scenes, what are some of the things that are at the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, so I think a lot of, like, especially given the martial arts background. I think a lot of people think that plays a big part in it, and it does, but like more so in editing, I would say. Like, because especially for combat codes, I wanted a lot of the action to be somewhat realistic, unarmed combat. But as far as like drafting or writing the original action as it goes, I actually think that doesn't help, and actually can be a hindrance to writing it, because you kind of get in your own head with the technical details. And end of the day, when you're writing action scene, if you are too specific or dry in a certain way, you're going to lose readers. I actually treat it a lot like dialogue, where like when you read dialogue, good dialogue, like what's the difference between dialogue that really captures you and dialogue that comes off dry or just as a placeholder. And oftentimes it's, of course, the stakes in the conversation, and stakes are also so important in combat, which sounds like, of course, the actual action itself is important, but the stakes behind the action are more important.
The emotional stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah. The
So
narrative stakes. Yeah.
I do find, from a logistical standpoint, not staying on the actual action is very helpful. So jumping, whether it's like head hopping, not necessarily to other characters, but kind of like somewhat omniscient point of view from the crowd, what they might be feeling from that perspective, what like team members that are on the sidelines may be experiencing. That's where you get the actual emotional impact of action or fights. Like one big inspiration for me is actually, if you've watched a lot of like combat sports, which I have watched a lot of combat sports, sometimes you'll see the preambles to the fight is actually what builds the fight. So they'll spend so much money and time filming the background of these fighters, whether it's boxing or mixed martial arts or whatever it might be. And this is all sports, like the Olympics. Think about how much time they spend on the backstory of the lives of the characters, their mom, their dad, like filming them, filming like their mom and dad, the emotions they're feeling, watching their son or daughter like skiing or whatever it might be. That's where it's at, and that's really where it's at when you write action, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. I think one of the things you said, which was like sometimes having a martial arts background actually gets in the way. I feel like that's really true, because you don't have the same tools as a prose writer that you do as like a filmmaker. Because a filmmaker, everything is there on the screen, it all happens really quickly. But if you were to try and literally write every single move in a fight, I mean, it would be so dry.
Yeah, and I've written scenes like that, and then I'll reread it, or a beta reader will be like, oh, nope.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to ask, do you have any favorite fight scenes in books or film?
Oh, outside of, so not in my books,
Right.
but well, certainly in some of your books, fine.
Other than my books.
Yeah. I mean, so from a film perspective, I think my coming of age was like in the 90s, so I'm like somewhat limited to like really somewhat corny but good 90s action flicks, which like, I guess Gladiator was not 90s, I really enjoy that. I thought the fight scenes in the first, I haven't even seen the second Gladiator, I don't know if it was good or, no, don't. I'm not.
It has
I'm taking
Denzel Washington.
Right, and I already played myself, but.
Yeah.
I still
It has
probably
Pedro
would see it
Pascal.
just for nostalgia.
See, I went in with appropriate level of
Okay,
expectations.
so yeah, that's what I think should be
Gladiator
done,
2,
right.
Right, which was like, I expect to see Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And I got exactly what I expected.
Yes,
So I was
this is important. The Gladiator one, I thought, again, the stakes, so much of that, Maximus is his arc, but TV, I really like this show called Warrior, and we have some mutual friends on that show, and the action's done really well. I know Shannon Lee, who is the co-writer for your new book, is a producer on that. It's a really good, I think it's still on, is it on Netflix now?
Yes.
That's a really good show. It takes place in like Gold Rush, San Francisco, Chinatown. It's like all these gang wars. It's a good show. Let's see.
Do you have any favorite MMA movies?
Well, there's like some classics like also called Warrior.
Warrior's a great one.
It's like an underrated.
I agree.
Underrated?
I think it's underrated because
Right.
I don't feel like that
when
many people
Tom
know
Hardy
about
was like
Tom Hardy.
beginning of Tom Hardy's career, and it's pretty good. There's some more obscure ones, and people hate this one called Red Belt, which is a David Mamet film, and it's kind of weird, but I actually I really dug it. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good one.
Have you seen Haywire?
Oh no, isn't that with Gina
It's
Carano?
Gina Carano. And it was also kind of this one.
Oh, it's Soderbergh, right?
Yes.
Haywire.
Yeah, Haywire.
Maybe I did. No, I have not seen
Yeah.
it.
It was also one of these things I feel like it sort of came out and then disappeared.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, if you want to see Gina Carano
Yeah.
beat people up.
I'm trying to think what else modern that. There's a lot of good TV on nowadays. Yeah.
Cool. So obviously your personal experience as a martial artist influenced this book a lot, but there was other things I went into as well. So I am aware of your fondness for Chocobos, for example.
Yes.
So there's definitely some Final Fantasy DNA
Yes.
that's in this book. So talk a little bit about that. What are some of the other inspirations from media or elsewhere that went into combat codes?
For sure. So I grew up playing, again, like 90s kid, playing a ton of like JRPGs like Final Fantasy and like Chrono Trigger. Like this is, like you talk about, like I was a reader, I was a big sci-fi fantasy nerd, like I read a lot of books, but like the other big form of storytelling that I consumed was like these RPG games. If you like have played these sort of games, it's hard, I don't game anymore because there's just not enough time, but like you spend hundreds of hours playing these games and I would play for the story. Like there's these grand casts of characters that all have their own arcs and like intense narrative, like beautiful soundtracks, like, and they were a big influence on me. And the cool thing that I've actually kind of thought about this a lot, the cool thing about games in general is they're not pigeonholed by genre. Like, so books, like as Fonda knows, like when you write a book from like, you want to write a book that's just true to you, but at the same time, if you're trying to sell a book to a publisher, or you kind of have to figure out what genre. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Like, what's the deal with this book? And I really love that a lot of these games are not pigeonholed by genre. So like, I grew up on Final Fantasy, which is like, especially if you played Final Fantasy 6 or 7, they're like, they're not sci-fi, they're not fantasy. They have like tech, they have like mechs, they have like technological elements, and then they have magic, and it's all seamlessly integrated, but it's not like, this is science fantasy, and I'm sure it's the same for Jade City, which is like, there's like elements of both. There's like science fiction as well as fantasy involved in it. And so when I wrote Combat Codes, that was kind of the mindset I went into, with like trying not to be, again, pigeonholed by genre.
Yeah. Final Fantasy 7 was definitely my jam.
Yeah, no, that was a game. That was a game changer for me.
Hundreds of hours of Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Good times. Good
It
times.
was the first PlayStation game I think I ever. That was PlayStation 1, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I had the Super Nintendo. So
Yeah, Super Nintendo. Yeah, the Final Fantasy 6 was.
Right.
I think the last
and
one I played on
Zelda,
that.
I think, were
Oh yeah.
drugs of choice.
Yeah. You ever play Chrono Trigger?
I didn't.
It's a good one. You gotta play that one.
My retirement, I'm gonna get to play games
Yes.
again. All these books we have to write, right? So, you know, on one level, of course, your book is this entertaining thrill ride, lots of cool action, fight scenes, but, you know, in my opinion, and I'm sure you share this, for a story to be a good martial arts story, there has to be something deeper than that. It's like martial arts, yes, we are learning to submit people and break their faces and all that, but like really so much of martial arts training is spiritual. And every martial arts tradition is so tied in with the culture and the values of the society that developed it. And one of the things that struck me as I came kind of near the end of Griever's Blood, and are these themes that you're starting to tease out as the story goes along, between like the tradition and the culture and the honor of the Grievar versus like this society of like corruption and commercialization that's starting to like overwhelm own them. And so talk a little bit about how those themes kind of emerge, and maybe what are some of these deeper cultural clash themes that are kind of coming to the forefront as you head into the third act.
Sure. So like I've always been fascinated by samurai culture, and so that was another big inspiration that went into this series. A lot of there's like a caste system that is very directly inspired by samurai culture, where you have a ruling class, the daimyo, and then you have a warrior class, the samurai, and then you have like a working class. And in the combat codes, you have the Grivar, who are the warrior class. You have the daimyo, which are literally just called the daimyo. I just was like, why not just take it? And then you have the grunts, who are the working class. And so the samurai or Grivar code of honor is a big part of their culture, and that's been they've been born into that, and that's what the combat codes are. The codes are a form of, you could call it Bushido, or like Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings, or Hagakure. There's all these ancient Japanese texts on like how to live a proper life, how to die, and it can get very funny. Like some of these, you read some of these texts, you read it and you're like, that is super specific. Like, and so I tried to, there's little, what do you call the little preambles before? What's the official word?
Yeah, no, there is an official
Yeah,
word.
what is it? This word I always forget. Someone's got to know. Like, yeah, epigraph. There we go. Who said that? Mike? I hear you. So the epigraphs in each chapter are directly from the codes, and I tried to use them to flesh out the world, the deeper meaning of the world. And some of them are super insignificant. Like a Grivar can only bathe like 7 times in a span of like 30 days, which is like gross. But at the same time, again, there were these weird prescriptions for the warrior caste, the warrior culture. And so yeah, it definitely also took from the samurai culture when there was the incoming of Western tradition and that clash of technology, like the Gatling gun coming in, and like the samurai culture becoming invalidated because they are the warriors, and how that holds up to the incoming. And so Murray represents the codes and wanting to adhere to this older culture, and then he's dealing with, again, younger fighters who are, to bring it to modern day terms, doing a lot of steroids and enhancements, and which is, again, talking about modern day combat sports or any sports. That's something that we're dealing with. Like, how do you handle that from an officiating standpoint, from a moral standpoint? And we're not even talking regular steroids. We're talking like, what if all of a nation's resources were poured into making one single person as good as possible? Like, what if the U.S. military budget was poured into like 10 people? Like, what would happen to those people? So
They get pretty messed up.
yes.
That's the takeaway.
There we go.
I really like that. The one that was a really nice touch was the epigraphs, and it made me wonder as I was reading them. I was like, are you going to collect these in like a chapbook and then release them as a special in-world item? Because I think that would be kind of cool. Like, collect all the combat codes and then have this sort of like.
If Orbit wants it, then.
It's interesting you bring up the samurai culture and kind of the evolution of that warrior caste. When I was reading, I recently, also for book research, read Hagakure. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about it was written actually during a time of like excessive peace, when like essentially like this samurai had started to had been at peace for a while.
I didn't know that.
And it was largely written by like an old school samurai guy who felt like this new generation of samurai, they were just soft. Like they were just like losing it. Like, this wasn't how, my grandfather did things, like now these samurai, they're like accountants, and so they and a lot of the samurai did like move into what we now think is like white collar type jobs, right? Because there just wasn't as much warfare to go around. So, but because they were this high caste, this high status, they were getting desk jobs essentially, and so a lot of like the documentation of those warrior ethos was retrospective. It wasn't written like at the time the samurai were actually doing all the.
It makes more sense, because
stuff.
otherwise they would be just fighting.
They would just be doing it, right?
Right.
But it was written retrospectively, almost as like, in the good old days, like this is how samurai were supposed to behave.
Right.
And so it's interesting because you have that in your books as well, this kind of like, some of the Grievar who have kind of taken on daimyo trappings, right? They're essentially like working with the daimyo.
Right.
And
Using technology.
right, using the tech that they're technically not supposed to be using. So yeah, that's sort of interesting historical connection.
Yeah, I wonder if Musashi wrote, I think he wrote the Book of Five Rings and the other one, Musashi's Dokudo after, I'm assuming after his lifetime.
Yeah.
Combat.
Yeah, I'd have to go find out like what the actual time period is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was at some point after that, right? Because it was sort of seen as like
Right.
historical, more of
Right.
like the glow of nostalgia of like this is how
Yeah.
you know it used to be. Yeah.
You definitely see it in martial arts culture too. It's like, this is how things used to be.
Oh yeah, I had a sensei. I've done karate for many years. I had the sensei who talked about like how it was back in the dojo when he was like 20 years old and training in Greece, and like there was just no rules, and like you know these people
Right.
would pass out during
Right.
training, and
Right.
you know things that you just would not get away with. And,
Right, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's
Without a
the
lawsuit.
same. When you have like a different time of like when there was like dojo storms and people were fighting for like the honor of their schools, and now it's like, I'm trying to run a business, man. Or like, we have a kids program. We're not gonna like.
Let's sign that waiver. Like, make sure nobody sues anybody here.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So this is really your second time launching the trilogy because you had a entire journey as a self-published author with the Combat Codes before Orbit came in and offered a traditional publishing deal. So tell us a bit about like kind of what that journey was like and how that happened, and what's it like kind of going through this process a second time, but like in a different way, and traditional, what self-published journey versus traditional published journey?
Yeah, no, it definitely seems like a long journey. As you know, like even in traditional publishing, even when you're like doing an author event like this or a book's coming out, like it's tough because you're like already you're already like writing like 2 books ahead.
Yeah.
And you have to like recount. Like I've had times where like, wait, what did I write? But like, so that's even more as far as there being like multiple versions. Overall though, extremely a positive experience. And I thought I got like a really unique experience where I got to take user, like almost like a startup mentality where I had like a beta version. And like, I know that you're not supposed to read user reviews like Goodreads. It's really bad, like for mental health, but like I do it. I don't know if I'm like a masochist or what, but for the self-pub versions, I like, you throw out the really good reviews and you throw out the really bad reviews, but there's like a middle ground where you have like really valid, great criticisms. And like coming from like a martial arts jiu-jitsu background, like it's all about feeling the criticism and making iterations to improve yourself. So that was my mentality. And like, there were some great criticisms in there that I was able to actually take and bring to my editor, and then also take all my editor's feedback and apply that. So for me, it was an incredible experience being able to say, I wish I could have fixed that like character arc. I wish I could have added more world building for that specific part of the book. And I was actually able to fulfill that, which is, I don't know, it's kind of like that doesn't happen
It's the
very often.
2.0 version.
Right, and like most people think with like Brad, they'll like really want to cut your work out, but this was the opposite, where they wanted me to do more world building. They wanted, like in the original, Murray had like a much smaller role in the first book, and I was able to like really expand his POV and kind of like add a new arc to his story. And so yeah, it was a really good experience.
Mm-hmm. Were there, without giving away spoilers for those who haven't read the books yet, were there any other like major changes that happened between the self-published version and the traditional?
There was lots of weird little quirky things. Like in the self-published versions, there was an audiobook, and I called the main nation, it was spelled Mercuri, which is a lot like Mercury. So of course the audio narrator was pronouncing Mercury. So the audiobook listeners all like immediately got the impression that this was like a future planet type of thing, like very viscerally like this is taking place like 1,000 years from now when we've colonized other planets, and this is taking place on the planet Mercury. And that was totally not the case. It was just like, I named the nation Mercury with an I. And so that was like, nope, that one's going, it was named Azo, and like, it really was much better, not only from an audiobook perspective, but from just a reader perspective. So like little things like that. In the original, too much like lip service to like the martial arts culture, like a little too much, to the point where it would alienate like the wider reader base. End of the day, I want this book has appealed to a wide variety of audiences because I've made it, you know, accessible, where essentially, again, Hogwarts with martial arts, instead of learning a martial arts system, you're learning about, instead of learning a magic system, you're learning about martial arts system. So you don't need to know about martial arts. And so I really did push the book in that direction further to appeal to a wider audience, while keeping some of those Easter eggs for, you know, the martial arts crowd.
All right, lightning round.
Okay.
Okay.
Whoa.
Gi or no gi?
If you ask any of my training partners, right now it's all no gi,
Okay.
primarily because it's better for, I could talk about this for a while, but it'll be like this lightning round.
Lightning round,
No
can't
gi,
think too hard.
No gi means you're doing martial arts without a uniform, you're just wearing street clothes, and it's better for my back, and also it's just where I'm at, but I like gi too.
All right. All right, another one. Fantasy or science fiction?
Ooh, fantasy, I would have to say.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Dragon or rock?
Like a rock. Oh,
Yeah.
rock. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like chocobos.
Yeah.
Giant birds.
Yeah.
And you as
I
well.
also
Fonda wrote a book
giant
called
birds.
Untethered Sky
Like
about
more things
giant
in common.
what do you call them? Murder birds.
Murder birds.
Yes.
Murder birds.
Yes, I like
Yeah.
murder birds.
Yeah. Also rocks. Mine fly and people can't ride them, but they can ride yours. So that was actually one of my biggest complaints about my book with the rocks, was like people were unhappy that
They
could ride
thought
them.
they were getting like a fourth wing, or like a dragon
A dragon rider's
story.
yeah, but it was
Yeah.
more of a falconry story. So
Right,
they fly.
right.
you can't-
Birds
But you
are
can
like
ride
cats
those.
kind of. I feel like they wouldn't want
Yeah.
riders if they're flying. I don't know.
Okay. Giant birds, good. Kimura or omoplata?
Oh, omoplata, and these are two jiu-jitsu techniques. Yeah, I mean Kimura for control, omoplata, both. No, omoplata. You're really.
Make you choose, I'm making you choose.
This is a tough question.
Yeah. All right, omoplata.
Mhm.
Covers or new ones?
You know what? I'm gonna go with old ones.
Yeah.
And
All right.
Orbit. Good job, Orbit.
Don't worry.
If anyone from Orbit's listening, well, an artist named Felix Ortiz, who's actually local to Massachusetts, he's incredible. And he did those first covers, so they have a fond place in my heart. And, you know, I mean, like, it's nice that there's dragons and stuff, even though there's not really dragons in the book, so.
I also know the feeling of having books with dragons on
Yeah.
them with no dragons.
Yeah, and we don't, as authors, we have very little control. Maybe Fonda, you probably have some control.
I
You can put your foot down, right?
So, on a more personal note, you're a super busy guy. You obviously write books, you have a day job in marketing, you have 3 daughters, and also obviously you train, you teach BJJ. None of those are actually like jobs that you kind of ever clock out of. And they're, so my selfish question is, what are your secrets to productivity?
Going crazy. There's the honest answer.
That's what I do. But
Very
I'm kind of
stressed
like,
all of the time. No, it's serious. I'm serious. I'm very bad at organization. And so I have to kind of go with like vibes of how I'm feeling, which oftentimes does not work. And so, yeah, I'm a little bit of a mess.
What if your vibes are like, I'm going to play Squid Game too? Like,
Yeah. I mean, here's what I do. I do, not in like a hedonistic way, I do what feels good. So like I train martial arts because on the day, after I train, I feel better. If I don't write, I get very grumpy. I have to write or I feel better, and I have to work to support my family. And so it's kind of like things just fall into line based on like day of like, I better do that, otherwise I'm gonna be a problem.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
whatever is like
wish I had
nagging you
some,
the
like-
most in that moment.
It's true.
Right.
I wish I had a system or something to impart, but I feel like I'm very much learning that part of juggling, and it would be nice to write full time sometime, at some point in life.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure too.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think that in many ways, you're forced to be efficient as a writer when you've got all that stuff going on, right? Because you know, like, I only have like this amount of time.
Right.
I think actually now that I do write full time, but having that flexibility in your schedule can be a double-edged sword,
Right.
right? Because you don't have like as much organization to your day, and you also don't have like someone sort of.
That's a lot of pressure too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immediate deliverables. So.
So my advice for writing, if anyone's an aspiring writer, is like, what I have learned for sure is you write wherever you can. Like, I'll write on my phone, which I hate so much, the feeling of writing on my phone, but I will do it. I'll like be at my daughter's ballet class and in the car or whatever, and I'll just be like writing on my phone, or I'll be dictating something, or I'll be literally anywhere I can get it, and I'm getting good at that. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, and not being like precious about rituals or like,
Yeah, no more like
inspiration
morning
has to
coffee
be
with your like
straight.
nice music.
Right,
you know?
right.
No, it's just like,
Yeah.
ah.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen King comes out a whole bunch of like novels, Indian like a trailer or whatever, like when.
Yeah.
Probably high on coke.
A lot of drugs.
Exactly.
A lot of drugs. I haven't gotten into that yet. Maybe that's the next step.
Here. Turn off the live stream. So what's next for you? I mean, we talked about how we're often like 2 books ahead by the time the book comes out. So what's going on for you right now? And do you see yourself ever returning to the world of combat codes? Or you got something?
Combat Codes, again, if Orbit were down for it, if like a TV show were made or something and it got some momentum, I would be down for sure. I have like prequel and sequel ideas that I would love to explore that are already like percolating in my head. I wrote a techno thriller that's on sub, and I told you I thought maybe it's dead, but you reassured me maybe it's not.
Yeah,
because
so it's like, it's only been 2 months.
Right.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a long time when you finish something, you send it out, your agent sends it out, and then like people are turning it down. You have to get used to a lot of failure. I stopped listening. I stopped like getting the messages from my agent about the rejections, which is probably a smart idea. But so we'll see what happens with that. I'm excited about it. It's like a kind of Jurassic Park story, but with ancient hominids getting brought back. There's a lot of action, and then I'm writing a middle grade story, which I'm super excited about. That also is martial arts oriented, called Mixed Martial Arts. No, mixed. No. Mixed martial magic. Mixed martial arts would just be. Okay, I think that's meant to, mixed martial magic. So yeah, it's a middle grade portal fantasy that I'm drafting.
Awesome. All right, let's open this up to some questions if you're down.
Yeah, I am down.
Okay.
Thank you, Fonda.
No, of course. Anyone have any? Yeah.
I love both your guys' work, but you guys seem to have a very different perspective on violence's role in a culture. Like Fonda, you seem to write in a world where violence is trying to be conquered by society, and you write in a world where violence is celebrated and promoted. What drew you to those philosophies when it came towards like themes and motifs in your works?
If you're so with the Greenbone saga, one of the things that I wanted to do was take kind of inspiration from like gangster fiction and mafia movies and put it into a fantasy world. So one of the things that I thought about as I was developing this fantasy world was if you have a world where certain people have essentially superpowers, they're just better, stronger, have abilities that normal people don't. what are kind of the guardrails that society puts around those people to be so that there's a functional way for this warrior caste to coexist with the normal population. So I think actually one of the things that Alex and I have in common in both of our stories is both of these warrior castes in their respective worlds have to adhere, or at least there is the presumption that they should adhere to a set of strict codes of conduct. But in Alex's world, obviously that code of conduct is sanctioned on like a legitimate basis for resolving disputes between like nations, right? So, but in the Greenbone saga, there is also that codified code of conduct, but it's between these Greenbone warriors and how they conduct duels and they solve disputes amongst themselves almost extrajudicially. But they have this code of honor where you're not allowed, you should not be involving civilians, right? Those who don't have jade. So in fact, I think our philosophies, and Alex chime in with what your thoughts on this, I actually think that the approach from a world building standpoint is very similar. It's this idea of like, how is combat legitimized and like kind of what is its role in society that allows people with certain abilities to coexist with people who don't. And that kind of comes, and you see this in our own world too, right? Like what are kind of these codes of honor that keep duels from spiraling into wars between peoples, but keep it like contained between families or between tribes. So yeah, that's my thought on it.
No, I think you pretty much answered it. My other thing would, I think for me, again, the inspiration from more modern day like combat sports or even sports in general, I think bleed into the fact that the violence there is celebrated because it's kind of, even though they're fighting for a greater purpose, it's in a sportive kind of element that they're fighting. So, but I think you answered that pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to world building, especially because we both work in the speculative fiction space, and so much of what makes the world plausible and makes it compelling, authentic feeling is like what's sort of the context that's recognizable as an analogy to our world. So like, for example, my debut novel, Zero Boxer, it's very much a sports story. So like the combat there is set very much tournament style, like this is a sport, it's for entertainment. And the conflict there comes about when like some of those rules get broken. And I think in both combat codes and in Greenbone Saga, some of the tension comes when those rules that have been in place for a while start to kind of break down, or there's like obviously fissures or like gaps. And what happens when people start to question or circumvent or those rules start to see like pressure cracks, right? In Greenbone Saga, it's because there's this drug that's introduced that allows people who don't normally harness jade to be able to harness jade. In combat codes, right, you see like some of the excesses of the daimyo and like the Grievar starting to use this tech that's forbidden to them, right? So very, very similar overlaps, in my opinion. Cool. Great question. Any others? Dumb questions are allowed too.
Other than Greenbone Saga, were there any science fiction fantasy books that you took as a good inspiration?
For like modern day ones, I was a big fan of Red Rising. I like that series a lot. Childhood books, Hunger Games, of course. I think that's a pretty close analog to the combat codes in a lot of ways. Just again, the sport of kind of like tying a society's fate to spectacle. Let's see. Another local author who I love is R.A. Salvatore, who I grew up reading, who's like very action heavy. His whole Drizzt, all the Dark Elf books were a big influence for me. Every once in a while I go back and read it. read some of those just to kind of get some nostalgia, get a kick out of nostalgia.
Any other questions?
You kind of mentioned it earlier a little bit, but with like editing and how different it is throughout kind of the first draft to the final draft, do you ever forget where you landed or wish that you had been able to go one of the other ways, but for whatever reason it had to go, you know, the way that it landed on being published?
Yeah, no, I'm sure Fonda will have some with all the books she's edited, but for me, yeah, I do have kind of elements of, I guess you could call it like buyer's remorse, almost like where you went one way and you've committed to a certain narrative with a certain character, and you can't really turn back. But sometimes you really can, and you just have to scrap like 30,000 words, which sucks really bad. But that's part of it. And you just have to like do what's at the end of the day. You have to keep in mind you're doing everything in the service of the story and the characters. You can't have any attachment to what you've written. I think that's one thing that I'm continuing to learn, and as you get to be a more experienced author, you really need to embrace that philosophy. I think it's universal, having to, you know, again, kill your darlings, whatever you want to call it. And so, yeah, I mean, you do end up, you hit, the way I write is, I'm a very pretty concrete discovery writer where I'll just kind of find my path and build the characters as I go along, so I end up doing that a lot, and it just comes with it's the price I pay for writing like that, because I'm not an outliner. As you can tell, I'm not that organized, and so I've realized that I have to pay that price of scrapping words, characters, entire arcs, and it's frustrating. I think I am. Is that
Yeah.
kind of?
Yeah, no, I just can't. I only learned that recently, that authors do that and do like massive rewrites, and it just blew my mind.
Well,
that
I'm in the
some-
middle of one right
you
now.
could do
Right.
that.
Right.
That's why my book is late. If anyone already speak for my life's book, that's why it's late, guys.
Well, what I don't do, which is entirely crazy to me, and I can't believe people do it, and I don't know if you probably can name some authors who do this, where they will like write an entire first draft and not even use any of it. It will literally just be like, okay, I did it, it's in my head, and now I'm gonna just start again. Like without even using any of the, like pulling any of the paragraphs, I'm just like, whoa, that is like next level, like chaos, like gremlin.
Yeah, I go on a writing retreat every week. I wish. I wish every year I go on this writing retreat. And I'm a slow writer, so I, you know, for me, a decent day of writing is probably like between 1,000 and 2,000 words. And I know when I'm at this retreat, I have nothing else on my plate. I can maybe do like 4,000 words. I know some writers who will like pump out 10,000 words a day, over
It's
10,000
crazy.
words a day,
It's
which
crazy.
is wild to me.
Yes.
But I recently had dinner with one of them. We were at an event with some other writers, and I said, how's that book that you're working on? The one that you got like 40,000 words written.
Right.
And he's like, I scrapped all of it. Because like, he was writing a ton, he was writing fast.
Right.
But it all ended up being mostly useless. It was just for him to like kind of work through the story in his head. And then he had to kind of start all over again.
Right.
So maybe like some ideas stayed from the first draft, but he scrapped all of it. So my view of it is like, you pay the piper somewhere.
Right.
You know, no matter whether you're an outliner, whether you're a fast drafter, a slow drafter, if you like drafting, if you like revision, if you hate drafting, somewhere along the way, you've got,
Yeah.
you gotta,
You gotta put together the story.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
just everyone's gotta figure out for themselves where they prefer their pain.
Right.
It's like, do you wanna give me your arm and go into an arm bar, or do you wanna give me your leg and leg lock?
Yeah.
You
No,
choose,
it's
you know,
true.
which pain do you prefer?
Right. No, there's no easy way.
Yeah.
How long, you mentioned that kind of like almost like beta version that you started with. How long was the turnaround between like the like finished version of that and then the finished like Orbit published version?
Yeah, it was I think 2 weeks. Orbit picked up the book in 2022, I think, And so, and then it took another 2 years. Traditional publishing is, or
It
no,
was on 23, wasn't it?
you know better. 23, yeah, it came out in 23. So another year, yeah, which was,
But that was pretty fast. Because, I think because it was already,
right,
you know, in publishable state by the time they picked it up.
right,
Like oftentimes they pick up something that's still, you know, it might be still another year of developmental editing.
right, right. And sometimes they'll just hold books back from getting released for whatever reason, marketing or
Their
schedule.
season is full or whatever.
The season is full, yeah, so it could be any reason.
On that topic of writing retreats, have you ever thought of doing a martial arts and writing retreat together?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Well, that would be
Get
Now
some
we
of
do.
that energy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to writing retreats where there's yoga in the mornings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, instead they're like,
a little more aggressive.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, you'd be surprised. People are pretty, like, after I train, I'm in my happiest. I'm I'm like, not grumpy at all. And I actually am pretty good at writing. If I can get it out at that point, it's like a great time to write. So I think it would, just like anything, I think, you know, exercise and like getting your blood flowing and sweating, I feel like it's very conducive for, I feel like mental health and physical health and writing.
And there's actually, I feel like quite a lot of writers who are martial artists.
Yeah, or have
Yeah, or have some
Some-
background. I think, you know, I mean, I think to some extent martial arts appeals, and writing appeals to like, that there's a certain nerdiness to both of them,
of course, yeah,
right?
especially,
Like, yeah, they're both, like, I find both writing and martial arts, it's like that hobby that like you can never be good at, which is like weirdly satisfying,
Right.
right? Because you're always trying to get better, but like you can never achieve perfection, like you just can't.
Right.
Right, and there's almost like a certain spiritual kinship there, I feel like, you know,
Yeah,
on
no.
the creative side and then like the physical side.
Definitely the
of balance.
difficulty barrier in a lot of the martial arts and writing especially have a similarity. Like, and I feel like in martial arts, your body can take a beating, but your mind don't. The reason why a lot of people quit, like for example, jiu-jitsu, is like it's not necessarily physical. It's like mental. They're not good enough. They you know haven't improved as fast as they thought they would. They had expectations. I feel like with writers, that's the number one reason why like someone will write something and then they'll be like, it's not incredible, and then it's like, of course it's not. You know, just right.
Yeah.
Just start.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, publishing also beats you up a lot, so it's kind of, there's similarity there, like in terms of, you know, your resistance to punishment.
Rejection.
Right.
Yeah. And it's always a new kind of rejection.
Sorry, it's
It's always
turning
a
into
new
therapy
kind.
session.
Yeah. Guys, I need help.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, sorry.
It's okay.
So martial arts and culture is like very big focal point in your works. And in the past like couple decades, we've seen a lot of evolution in martial arts. With judo becoming Olympic judo, and jiu-jitsu, or Brazilian jiu-jitsu becoming like sport, no-gi jiu-jitsu. Do you think there's ever a point in which a martial art can evolve to the point where it's divorced from its original culture?
I think it's happened.
Mhm.
I think it's definitely happened. Like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a good example where, of course, there's like the Japanese origin from like judo and traditional Jiu-Jitsu, and then in Brazil how it evolved, and like there's so many like cultural aspects of when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was brought to the U.S. There was so much of the culture that was brought over, and now I feel like in many cases it's like with a multiple newer generations now, a lot of that culture has been shed for good or bad. You can argue about that, like for like business reasons, like we talked about earlier, like trying to run a business versus like have some sort of like blood sport. And so I think that's especially in the current environment where like, you know, UFC has become such a big sport and there's so much money involved. You're seeing like now like athletics lead into like martial arts culture, and I think it's kind of cool, but also again depending on your perspective. we're getting to see in like a hyper fast time frame the evolution of a lot of the martial arts, and like now they're like bleeding back into like judo and wrestling and boxing becoming like bigger influences. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think martial arts is a really interesting like cultural element to track, because it's kind of like food, right? In that every time it touches a new culture, it gets like assimilated or it's like adopted, it changes in some way, right? I mean, like even like Kempo karate, for example, being like this interesting like Americanized, combination of like American fighting styles with like traditional Okinawan karate, and like it's kind of like that interesting intersection, right, where it's like two kind of cuisines or cultures will meet and they'll kind of blend into each other and create something that's kind of new and different. And I think as writers, like that's just such fertile ground, because we're creating our own cultures, our own worlds. My debut is essentially like MMA in space, so like at some point, if we go to other planets or we go to space, we're gonna punch each other. Like we're gonna find a way. So I just think that like that, for better or worse, that vein of like martial tradition, of aggression, of like how we express ourselves, like physically in combat, is just kind of part of human nature, and the way that our society evolves, the way that our culture interacts with other cultures, just is always going to be is always going to be reflected within the martial traditions and practices of that day.
Just another, Muay Thai is a great example where that's evolving a lot, because it's such an insular martial art, and like for a while, all the practitioners always go to Thailand to practice Muay Thai. Because, I mean, there are obviously some of the best Muay Thai fighters out of Thailand. They train kids from like a very early age, but we're just seeing now, like because Muay Thai has become such an integral part of like mixed martial arts, that you're seeing it like bleed out the other way. Like we have a lot of really strong like Eastern European Muay Thai fighters that are starting to like almost dominate, and it's like creating this thing that writers like, where it's like a cultural like clash that creates so much trauma, like because there's people that are attached to things and they don't want the cultural aspects. Everyone has a good point, and it's like, that's, again, as Fonda said, that's really fertile ground.
Yeah. One of the themes that came up when I was writing my books was this idea of like diaspora culture and how it diverges and is different from homeland culture, if you will, and like that includes martial traditions, right? So the people who like left the homeland, they often kind of carry like an older version of like their culture with them, and they're often better at preserving it even than like the homeland culture, because that homeland is like that's the homeland, but they're like evolving or they're changing. Like an example of this would be like and back to bringing it back to martial arts, right? Like wushu, is like the stylized performance aspect of kung fu is kind of frowned upon, or like seen as like just sort of fake, flowery, performance driven, and there's lots of practitioners of traditional kung fu who are outside of China proper who would see themselves as more of the like the bastion of traditional Chinese martial arts, right? And like they left generations ago. So there's like a lot of interesting ground to be trod and all that. Yeah, just some more questions today.
We have time for one more question.
All right, we have time for one more question. And then we have some books to sign. Last one. All right. We're good?
I think so. I mean, that was an excellent question to end on.
Yes,
So,
it was.
thank you both so much.
Thank you.